first of all, before we get to any reviews, let's talk about the Salt Path, because we've got a lot of correspondence on this, as you may well imagine. The Observer published an article by investigative reporter Chloe Hadjimathieu, which alleges that key elements of the story behind the 3 best-selling books, selling over 2 million copies, and the recent film The Salt Path are not true. The film was billed as, quote, based on the incredible true story, end of quotes. And as you know, we spoke to Jason about it a month ago. So a summary of what the Observer have said. Their real names are Sally and Tim Walker. Sally Walker was arrested after being accused of stealing tens of thousands of pounds from her employer. They borrowed $100,000 from a relative of Tim to repay the money that she was accused of taking. In return, Sally's ex-employer agreed not to pursue criminal charges. They couldn't pay the loan back. The Walkers owned and still own a property 90 minutes from Bordeaux in France. The claim that Tim Walker, that's Moth, Jason's character, had been suffering from corticobasal degeneration for 18 years seems dubious, as the life expectancy of sufferers is 6 to 8 years. And even in rare cases, people with the condition after 12 years are extremely disabled at that point and need round-the-clock care. Neurologists and researchers the Observer spoke to said they had never seen anyone live as long as Tim Walker and were surprised by his apparent lack of acute symptoms. Neurologists say the damage corticobasal degeneration causes to the brain is devastating and irreversible, and therefore impossible to walk off. So there is a statement from Number 9 Films and Shadowplay Features, who made the film. They say this: the film is a faithful adaptation of the book that we optioned. The allegations made in The Observer relate to the book and are a matter for the author, Raina Wynn. We have passed any correspondence relating to the article to Raina and her agent. When we were recently made aware that The Observer was planning to publish, we advised our key collaborators, filmmakers, and stakeholders. There were no known claims against the book at the time of optioning it or producing and distributing the film, and we undertook all necessary due diligence before acquiring the book. The journalist contacting us about the story at the end of last week was the first time we were made aware of the allegations. Now, we have had, as I mentioned, lots of correspondence, as you can imagine. For example, Joe says, having read the book, watched the film, and enjoyed both, I feel somewhat betrayed. Craig says, I'm not suggesting that either you or Jason misled their audience, but are the victims of this lie, assuming the article is accurate. I would be interested to hear your thoughts. It's disappointing when a supposedly true story isn't. And Nick in Southampton says, if even the diagnosis of Moth's illness is questionable, then where does this leave the film? What happens to a film that is billed as based on a true story when we find out that it is, in fact, inspired by true events? Can a film like The Salt Path survive when reality bites? Of course, based on a true story and inspired by true events, I mean, that it's sort of semantics, really, the difference between the two. But Mark, what do we know as far as we're aware? Where are we? Now, we should say we're speaking on Wednesday morning.
Yeah.
This may well change by the time the pod drops on Thursday, or you're listening to it Friday or the weekend. But what do we know at the moment?
Well, pretty much what you've said is what we know. That statement from Number 9 Films, which is the film company's position, which is we did a faithful adaptation of the book, and as far as anyone knew, there was no question about the book at the time. And if there is a problem, then that is for the author. I think that there is going to be a statement, I think, from the author, probably sometime while we're recording this show, because as you said, we're recording on Wednesday morning. So that we don't know about yet. It is clear that it is a very, very damaging allegation. And having read the Observer piece, I have to say it seemed to be very thoroughly researched. I mean, it did seem to have been a very, very thorough piece of journalism, which obviously is incredibly disappointing if that is the case. But at the moment, I'm not sure what the official response from the Wynns is. Only that statement that you read out from the film company is, look, we did a faithful adaptation of a book, which at the time there was no sense from anybody else that the book was anything other than true.
I think the only thing I've seen from her is she has said that the Observer article is misleading and
Yes.
they're taking legal action. So it wasn't specified in what way it's misleading.
I
And
think, just to be clear, I think what she said was it was misleading and we're taking legal advice,
right,
which is a
which
slightly
is very,
different nuance.
yes, it is. So I'll put I guess this question to you is adjacent to this conversation.
Yeah.
You have, as you've mentioned a few times, because we like to do this, you have a book coming out
Yes.
in September.
Thank you for mentioning that.
Right. So I write fiction. You write factual books. You write nonfiction. Okay.
Yeah.
Anyone who works with you or lives in your house knows how much you stress over getting the facts right, because this is your responsibility. If there is I'm not saying this to try and make it worse. I'm saying this to try to highlight the thing.
Thank you.
The responsibility is on you as the author to get this right. And if there is something that is wrong, then that is your responsibility. I'm saying this in a general sense, meaning that if you write nonfiction, it's it's the job of the author to get it right.
Well, yes, it's also, I think look, I don't know. I mean, I wrote, as you may remember, I wrote a book some time ago called It's Only a Movie, which was basically a sort of autobiographical account of being a film critic. And I described that book as being inspired by real events. And I say at the beginning of it, I'm saying that because the way I remember things and the way things are not necessarily the same thing. And in fact, there is a section in that book in which I tell a story about a thing that happened with me and Tim Polcat when we're on the set of a rock video in California. And then I say at the end of it, incidentally, I need to tell you that Tim says that none of this happened and I completely imagined it. I remember having an interview once with Edward Woodward about The Wicker Man. And Edward Woodward described this thing in which he said that as his character walks up a lane, they had these orange trees in blossom behind him, these small orange trees. He said, but the thing was they only had 5 of the orange trees. So what they did was, as the shot went past the orange tree, a guy would pick the small tree up, run around the back of the camera and put it, so that there'd be a continuous stream of orange trees. And I then asked the other members of the cast about this, and they all said, that's complete nonsense. That never happened. And I went back to Edward Woodward and I said, I've spoken to everybody else and they say it's not true. And he says, well, they're probably right. I mean, I remember it happening, but that doesn't mean it happened. Right. So that's a sort of slightly different matter. I think the issue here is, I should say that, I did an onstage with Jason and Ray Wynn in Cornwall. I met Ray and Moth, which is short for Timothy. And they seemed, wholly, lovely, incredible people. So reading that Observer article, it is completely baffling. I think one thing that's obviously happened is there's been a lot of surprise, a lot of shock, a lot of, so we absolutely do need clarification on what the truth or otherwise of that piece is. But yes, that thing about fact checking and truth, it worries. And thank you so much for bringing up the fact that I literally signed off the final proofs of my book about film music yesterday. And I had the stressiest day in living memory doing it, because all I could do was go, is that right? Is that right? Is that right? Is that actually right? And that sort of thing just drives me mad.
Yeah. Anyway, I just mentioned it because the onus is on the author, and I'm sure the situation will become clearer. We are operating in the dark the way everyone else is, but that's a sort of a summary of where we are.
Yeah.
At 10:15.
Yes.
On Wednesday morning. And if that changes, if there's more stuff, and if you want to email us about it, correspondence@kermodeandmayo.com. Also, I think the medical stuff seems to me to be the most serious allegation, because obviously that will affect many other people as opposed to just the people involved in the financing of the house. So that needs to be cleared up.
Presumably, that is something which can be cleared up quite straightforwardly. I mean, the medical assessments, they will exist. So, we wait to see what happens with that. But yes, presumably that is something that can be straightened out quite simply.
To be continued. So before you go, thank you very much indeed for watching this review, but it is only a small part of what we do. Ain't that right, Mark?
A very small part. We do a weekly podcast from which these little tasters are taken when we review all the week's releases.
And we talk through all of those releases in great detail and with great precision.
And Simon interviews the biggest names from those releases.
and we discuss a whole bunch of stuff.
So join us by following our podcasts wherever you get yours. It's the only movie podcast you need. Kermode and Mayo's Take.
Exactly. I entirely agree with Mark. What was it called again?
Kermode and Mayo's Take.
That's very good.